Monday, December 11th, 2017, Monaco 64, home of alternative economics and contrarian views. I want to talk about my background in the futures market. I worked from 1993 to 2012 as a futures and options broker for institutional clients, not private clients. For my clients were mutual funds, corporate treasuries, other banks, hedge funds. And I started out at a firm called Gerard and National Intercommodities in London. It was called GNI. It was the biggest futures and options broker at the time. We were members of several exchanges around the world. And at the time, exchanges were kind of a mutual organization. The brokers, they owned seats on the exchange, and the seats, there was a privately held, and you could buy seats from the exchange. Even someone from the public could go and buy a seat on the Life Exchange or in the CBOT. So it wasn't concentrated in a big few financial institutions. But for the last 15, 20 years, all these futures exchanges have consolidated, and they've all become public and issued stock. And so there is no more mutual ownership in the futures exchanges. And the reason why I'm talking about that is because of the Bitcoin future. Actually, there's two contracts starting out, and that's the other thing I wanted to talk about. Usually when you start out a futures contract, exchanges will compete to try to get the business, and usually only one survives. I don't know of any futures contract that has done well in two exchanges. So the Bitcoin futures started trading yesterday on the CBOE, which is a relatively small exchange compared to the CME. And the CME future will start next Sunday on the 17th. I've already had a look here at the data of the CBOE, and we've had, let's see, the Bitcoin future overnight is traded 2,657, which is not bad for a new future, but I looked at the specification. One CBOE future, or XBT as they call it, is 1 Bitcoin. The CME future, the BTC, is going to be one contract will be 5 Bitcoins. So I guess you could say the CBOE has a head start because they're starting a week before the CME. But I have a feeling the CME will win out this contest, and one of them eventually will delist the Bitcoin future. Only one will survive. And I speak from experience. I worked for GNI for a few years, and then I moved to City Futures, which was the Citibank futures arm. They were taken over by ABN AMRO Futures, ABN AMRO Bank. I worked there for 8 years. Then I went to Men Financial for 6 years, which Men Financial eventually became MF Global. I left MF Global a few months actually before Corzine took over as CEO, and worked for another firm called Mint Partners. So yes, what I'm trying to say here is that I listened to a video by a guy called David Antonopoulos talking, because he's going to be involved in working the reference price for Bitcoin future for the CME. And he seemed quite naive as to who really owns the CME. He was saying, oh, the CME is more like a group of people who trade commodities. They're not like the banksters. But let me tell you, Mr. Antonopoulos, you're completely wrong. You look at the major shareholders, institutions in the CME, and I've got the numbers here. Capital World Investors, 9%, Vanguard, 6.7%, State Street, 5%, BlackRock, 2.8%, Merrill Lynch, 1.1%, JP Morgan, 1%, Fidelity, 1.3%. So they're not owned by the brokers anymore, these exchanges. And what I'm trying to say, I made a video October 31st, and I put it in the card about the bankers hijacking Bitcoin with futures. Yeah, could have. We have to see if these futures become successful. They could actually fail. But if they become successful, we need to keep an eye on it. It's going to take time to ascertain if they're successful. But what I can see here, it's going to drive a lot of business away from real Bitcoin, because both these contracts are not real delivery contracts. They're like what's called cash settled. And basically, when you trade a future here, you're only going to be betting on the price of Bitcoin. You can't ask the CME or the CBOE to send to, you buy a Bitcoin on the CME and say, can you please send the Bitcoin to my wallet? You can't do that. Or with the CBOE, you won't be able to do that. You buy a future with the CME, that's 5 Bitcoins. You can't tell them send the 5 Bitcoins to my wallet address. They won't be able to do that. So it's basically just speculation. And Mr. Antonopoulos talks about, oh, it's going to be good for the miners because they'll be able to hedge if the price goes up, they can sell. So if it goes down, their cost of mining is going to be improved. But that's the excuse they use for gold as well. And look at what they've done for gold, to golds by manipulating the price. And it defeats the purpose as well of the idea of Bitcoin, which is supposed to be sound money in a system that's honest and open. In my opinion, we wouldn't need financial futures. We've only had financial futures in the last 30, 40 years. Before, futures were more an agricultural thing because of the seasons you needed to hedge. But prior to the Bretton Woods agreement being ripped up by President Nixon by closing the gold window, you didn't need to hedge bond prices or stock. There wasn't a necessity because there wasn't as much volatility in the system. I know right now volatility is low, but hedging was something that was done for agriculture. And the reason why they've evolved these financial futures is because the system will not survive without them. Antal Fekete, an economist, and you can Google him and look. I might try to find the story and the article. And he says that these derivatives are all used by the major financial institutions and the central banks to keep the system from imploding, to create artificial demand or supply of financial assets and artificial prices. Why do you think the central banks have accounts with the CME or the Eurex exchange, which is the biggest exchange in Europe? Because they intervene now in the futures market. When I was in the futures market, central banks didn't trade in futures. They might have done through some big institutions, but they didn't really have the account with the futures brokers or exchanges. So be interesting to see what happens. It's early days, but what I'm trying to say here, first, I think only one of these contracts will survive. I would give the CME the advantage over the CBOE because it's such a much bigger exchange. But the CBOE has jumped the gun. They have a weak head start. That could make a difference. Who knows? Second, it will take time to ascertain whether the Bitcoin future in the CME or CBOE will succeed. We have to keep an eye on volume and open interest. Third, I think it could succeed, and it might take business away from real Bitcoin. Because as I told you, the major owners of these exchanges are big banks, big fund managers, big mutual funds. And I'm sure they're going to encourage their clients to trade the product on on exchanges that they own. They're not going to tell clients, oh, don't trade the Bitcoin future. You go, get your own wallet and buy the Bitcoin yourself. They're not going to do that. So that's what I wanted to talk about because I made a video, as I said, October 31st, and maybe people don't know my background, and I wanted to clarify my background. So I worked 20 years in this business, and before I worked in futures, I used to trade some options for myself on futures exchanges. So yeah, back then every exchange had there's loads more exchanges as well. Nowadays the CME is taken over loads of exchanges in the US. The Eurex in Germany is taking over all the major exchanges, or Euronext if you want to call it, in Europe. So what's happening this morning? Well, the Dow's up 23, the Euro is up a bit, Bitcoin is up about $1,000 at 16,500. Gold is $12.50, up $1.70. Pound is unchanged, and the dollar is down slightly against the yen, 10 pips. So let's see who's going to win this Bitcoin future race, CBOE or CME. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share it, subscribe to my channel if you haven't yet, and you also can follow me on Twitter and on steemit.com, and I'll talk to you later.